Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's Ag Forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions, your premier platform for real-time global insights. Well, I'd like to begin here by taking a look at some of the pictures that were sent over the weekend. This one near Benford, North Dakota, sent to me by Reed. And yes, we can definitely see the incredibly heavy snowfall amounts that came out of this system. But I'd rather have you look in the background, because what I see here is an unfrozen lake, and I see a lot of vegetation on the trees. And the problem here is that when a big snowstorm like this comes through early in the season, it is going to cause a lot of destruction because add in the wind, the weight of the snow on the leaves, we can really increase the force on our plants. And where we had a lot of the leafy matter was still in our fields. So unharvested corn and soybeans and so many other crops, we're going to slowly be seeing the kind of unfolding disaster of this system. Even though it is long gone, well, it still has a lot to do. And this is a better way to look at it. Look at how much snow came up in this drift here. This was sent to the Grand Forks, North Dakota National Weather Service office by Corey here. And so there's a lot of liquid still in this, which is going to be a part of the problem. And we don't yet know what's under this snow in terms of the damage and destruction. The National Weather Service did a phenomenal job not only in forecasting the storm but observing it. We're looking here just at the preliminary snowfall reports through Sunday morning. And we've got widespread 6 to 36 inches of snow. And this snow will be melting, and that means that there's going to continue to be a disaster to be had out of this. Because when we put it all together and look at the bigger picture, there was a wide swath in the north central plains that picked up anywhere between 6 and 36 inches of snowfall. And don't forget that as this deeper trough came through and really just bottomed out temperatures across much of the United States, that as those temperatures rapidly fell along the front range of the Rocky Mountains, getting over into the high plains and parts of, again, South Dakota, Nebraska, we did bring in snow to that area as well. And especially, I remember a great story for last week out of Denver where temperatures dropped better than 60 degrees in about 12 hours, and they got snow on the backside of this. But in addition to all that snow, take a look at this list, but let me blow it up so you can actually see it. This is only for North Dakota, but remember, we had widespread winds of 20 to 40 miles an hour around this. But in North Dakota, with all that heavy snow, we saw several locations that had wind speeds in excess of 50 miles an hour. So as we continue to watch throughout this week, we're going to see much more damage and destruction to our crops in the north central part of the United States. And that's going to be basically made worse when this melts. This is just looking at the last 72 hours. This is over the weekend. And we can see that we have between 1 and in some locations almost up to 3 inches of liquid equivalent in that snow. So as it melts later on this week, we will be seeing a flooding problem unfold in this area. Meanwhile, out ahead of it, you can see the full system here stretching from Texas all the way up into the Canadian prairies here. A powerful low-pressure system brought heavy rain to parts of Wisconsin and Michigan, in through parts of southern Illinois and Indiana, and then eventually over there into the lower and mid-Mississippi river valleys. And out ahead of it, we still had a lingering boundary from the previous system, which brought some needed rain into parts of the Carolinas. Now, they need a lot more rain in the Carolinas. This is looking over the last 2 weeks here. We can see that that is one region from North and South Carolina, actually going up to parts of Virginia as well. Okay, we need that rain all the way down through the Cotton Belt there, the Eastern Cotton Belt, getting into the Panhandle of Florida. We're going to talk about rain that'll be coming into that area. But where you see these deeper shades of blue, that's where we have between 2 and as much as 5 times of normal rainfall and some of that snow just here in the last couple of weeks. So this is a very important forecast video to see who will be getting the precipitation in the near term and who won't. And will it help or will it hinder? So let's just take a look. This is through the end of this week, through Friday. Who's getting it? There will be a nice break in through this area as higher pressure builds in. And as the next system that comes through later today on Monday and then on Tuesday kicks off a low that's really going to be taking shape here in the northeastern part of the United States. So a little bit different than the previous system. This one's a bit more starved for moisture in the midsection of the country. So it doesn't really get going until it becomes a nor'easter and taps into that Gulf air and also the air out of the Atlantic. But the first blizzard, the one that went through over the weekend, it's going to leave a front that's going to linger right in through this area. So part of our drought, parched, southern United States area here is about to get a lot more precipitation as higher atmospheric pressure sets off the coast and just pumps that moisture into that lingering boundary in through this area. And as you can see, this spreads through parts of the East Coast here, getting some much needed rain to those areas. But Midwest, you need to be watching this. The heavy precipitation coming in from British Columbia through coastal Oregon and Washington is the remnants of Super Typhoon Hagibis. And as that comes through, it will be initiating a powerful low pressure system around the 19th, 20th, and 21st. That'll come through the midsection of the country. So the reprieve we're about to enjoy will be brief in the midsection of the country. So great model agreement here. I'm going to show you the GFS ensemble. This is week 1 on the left. Again, the heaviest precipitation corridor stretching from the northeast down here through the Cotton Belt. Now, very, very dry in that area. We need to bring in that rainfall. But we can see a big section of the U.S. who's going to see near average or at times even drier conditions. We're going to take a closer look at that. But here comes the next systems coming through, taking them in the northwest first and eventually getting to the middle of the United States by the time we get deep into week 2. So look at the differences here. At that time, the trajectory of our storm systems in the Pacific turned to do something a bit more like this, and things get very active as a ridge builds in here and a deeper trough comes right in through that area. So now we've got this whole corridor showing up very wet throughout the week 2 time period. So over the next week, this region in through here gets a bit of a break, but we will be seeing a very active return of our pattern here once we get into week 2. Let's briefly talk about temperatures before I get into some of those details. Early this morning, we were watching this section of the country for our frost advisory area, but otherwise, much of this map not showing much color is a very good thing. Just to show you the true extent of our frost event from the last system, this is looking at Saturday morning's low temperatures. I think that was about the widest extent of our coolest air, although on Sunday we did bring that cool air pretty far to the east as well. But you can see a big section of the country got deep here into the lower 30s and upper 20s, and so this was a pretty expansive frost event for mid-October. So watch what these temperatures do here in the near term. This is going to play fast, but I'll bring it back and show you some of the details. So what we're going to see here is this is Monday morning lows, getting into Tuesday morning. Wednesday, this is behind the little system that sneaks through, but watch the end of this week. Ready? Thursday morning lows, Friday morning lows, getting into Saturday. So this Friday to Saturday time period, this is back on Friday now, we will be seeing a ridge in the midsection of the country, and that will be bringing a multi-day above freezing event over top of some of that snow. Now, we could bias this a little bit too much warm, but bringing that into this area will start to melt that snow and begin this flooding problem. But behind the next system that comes out over the weekend, we do get the colder air that sneaks in on the backside again. And we got to talk about that system that is coming through. Now, watch the bigger picture flow here. This is amazing. Here's the first trough that's going to be sneaking on off toward the north and east. Let's pause it right about there. See, if we take this back, that first trough as it moves through leaves a frontal boundary right in through here. And that will be the one on which we're starting to get the heavy rain early this week. Now, trough number 2 is this one, and it sneaks through right there and gets over to the eastern Corn Belt. And as this trough comes through Tuesday into Wednesday, it combines its boundary with the one that was lingering here, increasing the precipitation amount down here in the region I'm circling. This is also the trough that builds into a large nor'easter that sits right off the east coast of the United States. I'll show you that in a few minutes. Now, look at the ridge that builds in behind this through midweek. This is the warm-up in temperatures that the midsection of the country gets to enjoy as we get into, again, to Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday time period. But you see this? This deeper trough feature you see here stretching from the Bering Sea, getting over into the Gulf of Alaska, that is all part of the disruption from Super Typhoon Hagibis, which went over Japan this past weekend. The jet stream is really moving in between this ridge and this trough, and it is going to barrel into the northwest first and take us right back over into that pattern by Sunday the 20th. And this is the pattern we are sick of seeing. A deep trough over the west, big ridge over the east. Between the two is where you get the most unsettled weather. But nothing is blocking this flow, and that trough moves through. See it? And as it moves through, it appears that by the time we get toward the 25th, 26th, and 27th of the month, we go over to a pattern that has a ridge out west, that's a rebounding of temperatures, and a trough over the east. Now that will keep the east coast unsettled with weather, active weather. But in between this ridge and that trough, well, that kind of flow in through there is one that has upper level convergence, which tends to mean a drier time period. So we're going on this roller coaster ride, not only with our temperatures and precipitation, but just in the upper level flow of the atmosphere. So look at what it does to the temperatures. Over the next 5 days, trough number 1, the deeper one, moves here. The kicker comes in behind it. So we keep this section of the country cool, and this is kept especially cool by the snow cover. Now, the northwest is what's getting aimed or having take aim on here toward the end of this time period. And look at the cooler bias that comes in behind that. This is when the trough is fully established in the 6 to 10 day time period, and the ridge is setting up here, bringing the heat back in. But as you saw, the pattern continues to move. Into that 11 to 15 day time period, well, things get over back into a ridge here while the deeper trough sneaks back through. So that is your roller coaster temperature pattern here as we stretch this out over the next 15 days or so. Now some of the details. What I want to play for you here is the next 60 hours and let you watch the systems evolve. You see, we have 2 things to be paying close attention to here in the eastern half of the United States. Throughout the day on Monday, we have the lingering boundary in this area that will be meeting up with the new front coming out of the deeper low that was over Minnesota and North Dakota over the weekend. Now watch what ends up happening. Thunderstorms throughout the day on Monday, getting into Tuesday morning, train, which means they follow one another. The boundary is sitting in through here. The flow along it is parallel to the boundary, which means it's just going to be repeated rainfall events along a narrow corridor in through this area. Meanwhile, our next little trough sneaks in, produces a low pressure center that comes down out of the Canadian prairies into the north central United States and eventually over into Minnesota and Wisconsin through early morning on Tuesday. And that one sneaks through the Great Lakes here, getting into Michigan, leaving its frontal boundary through southern Michigan, Indiana, and back here over where it meets up with this boundary. So these 2 things combine as they head toward the east. And by the time we get into early morning Wednesday, throughout mid-morning Wednesday, this brings in some heavy rainfall here to the East Coast, some regions that desperately need it. Let's pick up from there with our longer range model. So this is now Tuesday evening, getting into Wednesday morning. Now at this point on Wednesday afternoon, we will watch this upper level trough split into 2 areas of low pressure. One that is sitting here on the border between Ontario and Quebec. The second one taking shape just off the coast here in this strong baroclinic zone. Now what that's going to do is that's going to blow up a big nor'easter that runs up the east coast. So look at this though. If you are in the Midwest, you see that this storm system sneaks through, bringing in some lighter precipitation, okay, while it's raining very heavily down there across Mississippi, Alabama, parts of Georgia, Arkansas, and Louisiana. But behind that, look, this is now Wednesday morning. Look at the midsection of the country. This is Thursday morning, Friday morning, Saturday morning. We could actually get several days here of drier weather in the midsection of the country. That will be before a weak front sits right in through this area for early Saturday morning, connected to a deep low up in parts of Manitoba and Saskatchewan. But that one goes through and could just produce widely scattered light precipitation. But what's taking shape here is interesting. Big area of high pressure sitting under a ridge just off the coast. A deep low which actually came into the northwest first. Okay, did you see it come into the northwest? Look at this, coming in the northwest. This is the end of the week. Let me just step you back. Thursday, Friday, multi-day rainfall event and some higher elevation snow in the northwest. And here's where we get into the weekend. Now with this high pressure center here pumping moisture into this, as the low takes shape here in the central plains and goes racing through Illinois up toward Michigan, that is the end of Hagibis. And that system, which is early next week, is still got a lot of uncertainty with it. Let me show you what I'm talking about here. This is where the European model wants to put this by 7 p.m. on Monday. The low pressure center sitting right in through here. The GFS wants to take this system down like this and bring it through Illinois. So the difference in the 2 tracks mean all of the difference in where the heavy precipitation is going to be. So next 10 days from the GFS, next 10 days from the European, these are their operational runs from 0Z today. They show the GFS heaviest rainfall here. The European brings it much farther to the north, and that's simply due to the change in the position of the low. Outside of that, overall decent agreement, although the European model is wetter in the northeast here than the GFS is with this next big system that's coming through But overall, this is going to be a pretty tumultuous pattern as we move through the middle part of the month. Okay? Now, just to show you the difference here between our two systems, the GFS model, there's the main trough. You can see that it still has this trough digging toward the south, hence the more southerly storm track, again, through Illinois and eventually through Michigan. Whereas the European model has its trough already beginning to lift at this point, much farther to the north. Who needs to really care about this? Well, a lot of us in the Midwest do, but specifically, I want those folks in the North Central Plains to be worried that the GFS would bring in a much better scenario than the European. If the Europeans got this right, this is another big precipitation event for parts of the Dakotas, and no one up there wants to hear me say that. So I want to show you these model differences and tell you I'll be watching it all week. Not a lot going on in the tropics. Interesting thing over the weekend with Melissa going from being an extratropical system back to over to tropical, which means it has a warm core once again. We're watching a few regions over the next 5 days, but the only one I'm concerned about is if we get some moisture here into the Bay of Campeche, any of these systems that do come through on these deeper troughs through the United States can draw on that moisture. So it's a moisture source if we want to think of it that way. Outside of that, the tropics not doing too much. So we're going to finish with a brief discussion about South America. I want to first take you to the report that was released by CONAB last Thursday. Soybeans, 120.3 million metric ton. That is what their current forecast is. That's up almost 5% on last year. But the corn forecast is down. They're expecting 98.3 million metric ton. That's down about 2% over last year. Just keeping an eye on what's going on over the next week, I have the European ensemble on the right, and I have the GFS ensemble on the left. I think the GFS ensemble struggled a bit with the Indian Ocean dipole, that big positive IOD event, making things a little bit too wet, but we can at least take a look at the forecast. That's what's in the background here. And then let's take a look at what we've seen so far. So I want to take you right now to Mato Grosso, and we can see that 100 millimeters, just for reference, is about 4 inches of precipitation. You can see they still have a bit of a small deficit, but more rainfall in the western and northern parts of Mato Grosso than the eastern part. Speaking of the eastern part, I'll take you here. This is in parts of Goiás, near Tocantins, near Bahia, that region. We are still in deficit in total rainfall in that area. So the eastern growing regions, very, very dry, still waiting on rainfall to get going. And just to finish up here, this is what we're dealing with in the southern growing regions. So I'll take you now, let's look at the European model over here, now down to like Rio Grande do Sul and Parna. We still see a deficit, although some recent heavy rainfall did come through, and we're expecting quite a bit more in both models here for southern Brazil. So just want to keep you up to date on what's going on in South America as they progress through the start of their growing season. We'll take a look at it in each video and keep you posted on what's happening here as the growing season progresses. But with that, we'll go and wrap it up. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a great week. Stay tuned to all of our content coming out this week, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thank you.